Stop. If you're seeing Aramco burning and Hezbollah strikes in the same cycle, this isn't just another headline storm. This is the kind of escalation pattern that changes the rules. Because once energy infrastructure is being hit and multiple fronts are active, the number of off-ramps shrinks fast. Quick one-letter comment. A, if you think this widens into something bigger. B, if you think it cools down. Just one letter. Now listen, because there are two versions of this story spreading at the same time. One version is pure doom. Point of no return. Everything is on fire. War is inevitable. The other version is pure dismissal. It's contained, minor incidents, nothing changes. Both versions can get you to the same place. Wrong. The truth usually lives in the uncomfortable middle, where damage can be limited today, but the pattern can still be dangerous tomorrow. So we're going to do something simple and useful. Strip the drama out, keep the signals, and read what matters. Because escalation isn't one event. Escalation is when events start stacking faster than leaders can control them. And when energy nodes and border fronts start stacking together, the risk profile changes for everyone, whether you're in the region or watching from across the world. Let's start with the energy piece, because this is where small events can have big consequences. When people say Aramco burning, your brain wants to jump straight to worst case, major refinery destruction, global supply shock, instant crisis. But what matters isn't just how big the fire was. What matters is that energy infrastructure is being targeted at all. Even a contained incident is a strategic message. It says, energy is reachable. And once that message enters the battlefield, every actor has to decide how far they're willing to go to protect, retaliate, or deter. That is the first threshold. Not, is the fire huge? But are energy arteries now part of the target set? Because the moment energy becomes a target, the world starts paying a risk premium. Not always in one dramatic jump. Sometimes in a slow, grinding way that shows up in insurance, shipping behavior, and political pressure. And that risk premium is where real global consequences start, even if physical damage is limited. Now, the Hezbollah piece. When you hear Hezbollah strikes, your brain may file it under ongoing border tension. But what changes the picture is when exchanges become more frequent, more intense, and more openly framed as war rather than enforcement or deterrence. Because a second front is not just more fighting. A second front is more decisions, more opportunities for miscalculation, more pressure on leadership, and more chances for the conflict to widen. And widening is what creates the point of no return feeling. Not one dramatic clip, but a narrowing of options. So when you combine these two, energy nodes threatened and a northern front heating up, you're not just watching violence, you're watching incentive shifts. And incentive shifts are what turn limited into open-ended. Now here's the first payoff, early and clear. The point of no return is not a fire, it's a pattern. It's when attacks widen, responses harden, and restraint stops being rewarded. That's the real definition. Because wars don't expand because one side wakes up and says, today I choose chaos. Wars expand because restraint starts feeling pointless. Because each side believes that holding back only invites more pressure. And once both sides believe that at the same time, you get a ladder. Strike, response, retaliation, proportionality arguments, deterrence arguments, more strikes. And the ladder becomes hard to climb down because credibility is now on the line. Credibility wars are the hardest wars to stop. They aren't about territory. They're about identity, fear, and proving a point. Now, let's make this practical. When you see Aramco burning, the real question to ask is not, how bad was the fire? The real question is, does this become a pattern that affects confidence and energy flow? Because markets don't need supply to be destroyed to react. They only need uncertainty. If people believe there's a growing probability of disruption, they behave differently. Shipping companies reroute, insurance premiums rise, governments start talking about supply stability, producers change posture, and suddenly the cost of everything tied to energy starts creeping. That's how global consequences spread without a single catastrophic event. Now, second payoff, energy is leverage. Even small attacks on energy infrastructure can have outsized impact because they change beliefs. Beliefs move faster than barrels, beliefs move faster than damage assessments, beliefs move faster than official statements, and beliefs shape behavior. Now, let's talk about why Hezbollah strikes matters in this exact moment. Because it's not just about rockets crossing a border. It's about whether the conflict is becoming multi-front in a sustained way. Multi-front conflict is inherently more dangerous because it multiplies the chance of something going wrong. It increases the number of actors. It increases the number of misunderstandings. It increases the speed of decision cycles. And short decision cycles are where miscalculation lives. This is how regional conflicts jump the rails. Not necessarily through one planned escalation, sometimes through a sequence of reactions that become impossible to unwind. Now, here's the trap. most people fall into right here. They treat these as separate headlines. Aramco is one story, Hezbollah is another. They scroll, they react, they move on. But in strategic reality, these are connected by one thing: signaling. Strikes are signals. Responses are signals. Statements are signals. Posture changes are signals. And when multiple fronts are sending signals at the same time, the signal environment becomes noisy. Noisy signals lead to bad decisions. Bad decisions lead to escalation. That's the danger. Now, let's put a clean framework on this so you can tell whether this is truly becoming point of no return territory. There are 5 thresholds that matter more than any hot take. 1. Does energy infrastructure targeting become repeated, not one-off? 2. Does the conflict become multi-front in a sustained way, not episodic? 3. Do shipping lanes and choke points start showing persistent risk, not occasional scares? 4. Does official language shift from limited to sustained and decisive? 5. Do you see posture changes, visible deployments, defenses surging, long-duration readiness? If you start seeing several of these at once, you're not in a headline cycle. You're in escalation structure. An escalation structure is what removes off-ramps. Now let's apply this to what's being reported in real time. Reports describe drones being intercepted near a major Saudi energy site, with shrapnel causing a small fire and no injuries reported in the Saudi incident. Other reports describe incidents in Kuwait involving shrapnel and minor injuries, and operations continuing. The details matter because they show a key point. Even when damage is limited, the fact that energy sites are in the line of fire is itself strategic. The significance isn't Aramco is destroyed. The significance is energy sites are being tested, and tests are how boundaries get crossed. Now, about Hezbollah, there is reporting that Hezbollah has launched attacks from Lebanon, and that Israel has responded with strikes in Lebanon, with some outlets describing the situation as a major escalation. Different reporting uses different language, but the core pattern is clear. Cross-border exchanges are active, and the risk of broader escalation is being openly discussed. Now, does this guarantee point of no return? No. And anyone who says guarantees is selling you emotion. But it does raise the probability that we are entering a phase where containment becomes harder. Because containment depends on 2 things: clear boundaries and mutual interest and restraint. The moment energy and multiple fronts become bargaining chips, boundaries blur, and restraint becomes politically expensive. Now, I want to show you how point of no return happens without a single dramatic moment. It happens when 3 pressures stack. Pressure 1, operational pressure, more attacks, more alerts. More defensive posture, less sleep, shorter decision windows. Pressure 2, political pressure. The public sees fires, strikes, and danger to economic stability. They demand strength. They demand protection. Leaders feel trapped. Pressure 3, economic pressure. Markets start pricing risk, costs rise, insurance tightens, supply chains react. Everyday life starts feeling the conflict. When those 3 stack, leaders don't just make military decisions, they make survival decisions. And survival decisions are where escalation accelerates, because nobody wants to look weak when the stakes feel existential. Now, quick reset, 1 word. What do you think is the bigger risk right now? Oil or miscalc? Comment 1 word. Now, here's the part that's going to sound counterintuitive. Sometimes the war explodes beyond expectations, not because someone intended a bigger war, but because systems collide. Air defenses, drones, missiles, shipping, intelligence mistakes, wrong assumptions. A strike that hits the wrong target. A response that overshoots. A rumor that forces a leader to respond. Modern conflict is fast. Fast conflict produces accidental conflict. Accidental conflict becomes real conflict. That's how escalation happens, even when leaders claim they want control. Now, let's talk about the global consequence mechanism in the simplest possible way. You don't need Aramco to be offline. You don't need a refinery to be destroyed. You just need enough uncertainty that the world starts paying for risk. Risk premium in energy shows up in higher shipping insurance, rerouted tankers, increased naval and air patrol posture, a political scramble for supply stability, market volatility, and eventually higher costs down the line. So if you're watching this and thinking, but the fire was small, you're missing the bigger mechanism. Small fires can still create big risk if they become repeated tests, because repetition changes beliefs. Beliefs change behavior. Behavior changes reality. Now, let's talk about the Northern Front mechanism, because this is where containment often breaks. When exchanges become routine, leaders start feeling like they're living in permanent danger. Permanent danger creates permanent pressure to solve the problem. And solve the problem is where conflicts widen, because solving usually means expanding targets, taking bigger risks, and accepting collateral consequences. Once a government moves from deterrence to degradation, you're in a different phase, a phase that is harder to pause. Now, let's be extremely clear about what we should be watching over the next 24 to 72 hours to know whether this truly is the point where off-ramps disappear. Watch 1, repetition. Do we see repeated attempts against energy nodes or critical infrastructure, not just one incident? Watch 2, geography. Do strikes spread to new areas or new categories of targets? Watch 3, language. Do leaders keep talking like this is limited, or do they start speaking like this is open-ended? Watch 4, posture. Do you see visible repositioning and sustained readiness as if a longer campaign is expected? Watch 5, coalition movement. Do allies reposition assets and posture as if escalation is expected? If those signals cluster, then yes, we're entering a phase where restraint becomes harder to sustain. Now, I want to address a psychological trap that makes people misread every update. The trap is thinking war is a scoreboard. Fire equals victory. Strike equals defeat. That's not how it works. War is a system of logistics, morale, intelligence, resilience, and political will. A single incident can be strategically massive or strategically irrelevant, depending on what it does to incentives. So instead of counting incidents like points, watch the direction of incentives. Are incentives pushing leaders toward restraint, or are incentives pushing them toward escalation? And here's the simplest way to tell. When restraint is rewarded, you see pauses, back channels, toned down language, and deliberate limits. When restraint is punished, you see rapid retaliation, wider targets, stronger language, and fewer pauses. That's your tell. Now, there's a second trap, believing point of no return is a single moment. It's not. It's usually a sequence where each side feels it must respond to a void looking weak, and each response makes the next response feel necessary. That's the ladder. And ladders are dangerous because people climb them without knowing where the top is. Now, let's bring this back to Aramco again, because this is where the global audience tends to misunderstand what matters. It's not just that oil is valuable, it's that oil is psychological. Energy is one of the few things that touches everything at once. Transportation, manufacturing, food, politics, household budgets. So when energy infrastructure is threatened, the entire world becomes an audience, and audiences create pressure. Pressure creates decisions. Decisions create escalation. Now, on Hezbollah, the danger isn't only the strikes, it's the possibility of chain reaction. Chain reaction looks like this. A strike hits. A retaliation hits. A misread signal triggers a bigger strike. A bigger strike triggers a wider response. Then suddenly more actors feel compelled to join, and the conflict becomes harder to isolate. That is how wars expand beyond expectations, not because one side wanted a world war, but because the system became too tight. Now, I'm going to give you the cleanest takeaway you can repeat to someone else in one sentence. A single fire doesn't mean the point of no return. A repeated pattern of widening targets and hardening responses does. That's the core. So don't let one dramatic phrase hijack your mind. Use the watch list. Repeated energy threats, sustained multi-front exchanges, persistent shipping risk, posture changes, and language shifts. If those stack, then we're entering a new phase. If those don't stack, there may still be off-ramps. Now, one last loop, because this is what you'll want next. If you want part 2, where I map the 3 likely paths from here, contained, widening, and runaway, and the exact signals that separate them, comment 2. That's it.